"Sir, can I have the leftovers from your meal? I'm very hungry," said a beggar girl to a millionaire dining on the sidewalk. When he offers what was on his plate, he wonders why she doesn't eat it right there. The child carefully stores the food and runs away as if in a great hurry. When he decides to follow her, he encounters a scene so shocking that his heart races immediately. What he sees with his own eyes makes him grab his phone and call emergency services right away, before it's too late. The aroma of truffles and red wine hung in the air at the Gilded Spoon, the city's most exclusive restaurant. Richard Miles adjusted his Italian silk tie as he distractedly glanced at the numbers on his phone screen. The latest contract had doubled his stock value, and a discreet smile touched his thin lips. At 52, the graying at his temples only added to his powerful demeanor. He was the personification of success. The waiter approached with precise movements to clear his still half-full plate. Richard had barely touched the lobster, his mind occupied with the upcoming board meeting. That's when a small movement in his peripheral vision caught his attention. There she was, a frail little girl, no more than 5, in a faded pink dress and worn-out sandals. Her large, deep brown eyes stared at the half-eaten plate with disturbing intensity. Her small, dirty hands clutched a crumpled plastic bag. "Mr.—" Her voice was so low he almost didn't hear it. "Can I have the rest of your food? I'm hungry." Richard felt his jaw tighten. Rarely did anyone dare interrupt him, much less a street kid. He was about to call security when something in the girl's gaze paralyzed him. It wasn't just hunger he saw there. It was a profound weariness, the kind no child should carry. "What's your name?" he asked, surprising himself. "Mia Claire," she replied, her fingers tightening their grip on the plastic bag. The waiter, noticing the situation, made a move to intervene, but Richard stopped him with a gesture. Something about the scene stirred memories he had buried for decades. The smell of a musty, thin mattress, the constant rumble of an empty stomach, the sting of shame. "You can take it," he said, pushing the plate towards her. He expected to see the girl devour the food right there, as he would have done at 7, when he rummaged through trash cans for scraps. But Mia Claire surprised him. With almost reverent care, she transferred the lobster and vegetables into her plastic bag. "Thank you, mister," she murmured, and before he could say anything more, she darted off down the sidewalk. Richard found himself on his feet before he even realized what he was doing. He left a few bills on the table, ignoring the curious stares of other patrons, and followed the girl. Something about this situation wasn't right. Why was such a young child alone? Why didn't she eat immediately? He turned the corner just in time to see Mia Claire duck into an alley. His elegant steps in Italian leather shoes echoed on the pavement as he quickened his pace. When he reached the alley entrance, the scene he found made his blood run cold. Mia Claire was kneeling beside another, even smaller child, practically a baby, lying motionless on the dirty ground. The little girl gently shook her sister's shoulder, whispering words of comfort that would break the hardest heart. "I brought good food, Annie Beth. Wake up and eat. It's lobster, just like Grandma used to talk about in her stories." Richard approached slowly, his knees giving way as he crouched beside the girls. The younger child, Annie Beth, had chapped lips and skin burning with fever. Her breathing was shallow, irregular. "She won't wake up," Mia Claire explained with a chilling calm. "It happens sometimes. I fainted from hunger once too, but it passes." Those words hit Richard like a punch to the gut. On his wrist, the $100,000 watch now seemed to weigh a ton. How was it possible that, just yards from a restaurant where people spent enough on one meal to feed a family for months, 2 children were literally starving to death? With trembling fingers, he pulled out his phone and dialed 911. As he gave the necessary information, he couldn't tear his eyes away from Mia Claire, who continued to speak softly to her sister, as if trying to keep her there with just the sound of her voice. "It's going to be okay," he promised, more to himself than to the girls. But as the wail of an ambulance siren began to sound in the distance, Richard Miles, the man who had built an empire on numbers and predictions, felt something for the first time in decades that he couldn't calculate or control: fear. St. Luke's Hospital smelled of disinfectant and sadness. Richard remained seated in the waiting room, his Italian suit disheveled for the first time in years. Beside him, Mia Claire swung her short legs in a chair too big for her, her eyes fixed on the door where they had taken her sister. "You don't have to stay, mister," she said softly, surprising him. "I know how to take care of Annie Beth by myself." The forced maturity in that childish voice made something inside him twist. How many times had that child had to be an adult? How many nights had she watched over her younger sister's sleep, carrying a burden even adults shouldn't bear? A nurse approached, carrying a clipboard. "Mr. Miles, I need the girl's information for admission." Richard looked at Mia Claire, who shrank slightly. "What's your full name?" "Little one?" "Mia Claire Santos," she replied, biting her lip. "And my sister is Annie Beth." "Age?" "I turned 5 last month. Annie Beth is 3. "And your parents?" The silence that followed was deafening. Mia Claire clutched the plastic bag in her lap, the same one that had earlier held the remnants of his meal. "Daddy, he goes out to work," she lied, but her downcast eyes betrayed the truth she tried to hide. The nurse exchanged a significant look with Richard. "We need to contact a legal guardian," she insisted gently. "Where do you live, dear?" "On Sycamore Street, number 47, Mia Claire answered after hesitating. "But Daddy won't be there now." Richard felt his heart clench. Sycamore Street, he knew it well. It was an area being swallowed by gentrification, where old buildings stubbornly resisted amidst new luxury constructions. Coincidentally, or perhaps not, it was the same neighborhood where he himself had grown up. "I'll need to contact social services," the nurse informed Richard in a low voice. "The situation is serious. The younger sister has severe malnutrition and dehydration. If they'd waited a few more hours—" She didn't complete the sentence, but it wasn't necessary. Richard could see the weight of that near tragedy on Mia Claire's small shoulders, who now stared intently at her worn-out sandals. "How long will she be hospitalized?" "At least a week, but sir, without a legal guardian—" "I'll cover all the costs," Richard interrupted, his voice brooking no argument. "And I want the best room available with 2 beds. The older sister stays too." Mia Claire lifted her head so quickly she almost lost her balance. Her enormous eyes filled with unshed tears, but she quickly wiped them away with the back of her dirty hands. When the nurse stepped away, Richard knelt in front of the girl, ignoring the state his designer suit would be in. "Mia Claire, I need you to be honest with me. Where is your father?" The girl's lips trembled. He sometimes takes medicine to sleep," she explained carefully, as if choosing each word. "Then he sleeps for many days. Grandma used to look after us when that happened, but she went to live with the angels last month." Each word was like a stab. Richard closed his eyes for a moment, trying to control the anger rising in his chest. Not against the absent father, though that existed too, but against a system that allowed children to live like this, invisible until they collapsed. From hunger in dark alleys. "And your mother?" "Mommy's with the angels too, a long time ago." "I was little, like Annie Beth." A social worker arrived at that moment, introducing himself as Carl. His gaze shifted between Richard, in his expensive, albeit wrinkled suit, and Mia Claire, with her worn clothes and disheveled hair. The suspicion in his eyes was clear. "Mr. Miles, can we talk in private?" Richard nodded, but before standing up he took his card from his pocket and handed it to a passing nurse. "Anything they need, just call me. Anything." As he followed the social worker down the hall, Richard glanced back one last time. Mia Claire had taken something from her pocket, a small, time-worn golden locket. She clutched it as if it were her most precious possession, whispering something he couldn't hear. In that moment, Richard Miles, the man who had built an empire on cold numbers and calculated decisions, felt something he hadn't experienced since his own childhood. The overwhelming sensation that fate had placed in his hands a responsibility, too great to bear alone. The makeshift meeting room was too small to contain the weight of the words floating in the air. Richard sat across from the social worker, aware that his Armani suit and Swiss watch created an almost obscene contrast with the peeling paint of the public hospital walls. "Mr. Miles," Carl began, leafing through an already worn folder. "I need to understand exactly how you became involved in this situation." Richard recounted the encounter at the restaurant, the discovery in the alley, each word feeling like a stone in his throat. As he spoke, his mind kept returning to Mia Claire, alone in that cold waiting room, clutching a locket as if it were her only anchor in the world. "You understand that your story, while touching, raises some concerns." Carl adjusted his cheap-framed glasses. "A man of your position suddenly interested in the well-being of two vulnerable minors. Are you insinuating something?" Richard felt his blood boil, but he kept his voice controlled. Years of tough negotiations had taught him to mask his emotions. "Just doing my job, Mr. Miles. I have to protect these children." "And where was this protection when they were starving?" The words came out sharper than he intended. "When they were sleeping alone while their father—" "Precisely on that matter," Carl interrupted. "We managed to locate the girl's father. Anthony Silva, 42 years old, former construction worker, had an accident 2 years ago that left him with chronic pain. His wife passed away 3 years ago, cancer. His mother, who helped with the children, passed away last month." Each detail was like a punch to the gut. Richard could see the tragedy unfolding. A man, broken by physical and emotional pain, sinking into medication and alcohol, dragging 2 innocent children into the abyss with him. "Where is he now?" "We managed to contact him. He's on his way to the hospital." Carl paused significantly. "Mr. Miles, I appreciate your concern, but from here on out—" "No!" The word came out like a shot. "I'm not just going to walk away and pretend I didn't see anything. Those girls almost died today. And that's terrible, I agree, but we have procedures. The father has custody, and despite the problems—" A sharp cry cut through the conversation. Richard was on his feet before he even registered the movement. In the hallway, Mia Claire's panicked voice echoed, "No! Let me go! I want to see my sister!" They rushed out of the room. Mia Claire was struggling in a nurse's arms, fat tears streaming down her small face. The locket she held had fallen to the floor, open, revealing an old photograph. Richard bent down to pick up the jewelry, and the world stopped. From the faded photo, a familiar face stared back at him, younger, with fewer wrinkles, but unmistakable. Miss Betty, the woman who had been his only maternal figure in the children's home where he grew up. The same woman who, years later, when he had already made it in life, tried to contact him several times, only to be ignored by a man too busy building his empire. "Grandma," Mia Claire sobbed, reaching for the locket. It was Grandma's. Richard felt his legs weaken. Miss Betty. The girl's grandmother was Miss Betty. The woman who had saved his life, who had given him hope when he was nothing more than another orphan with no future, had passed away, leaving her granddaughters at the mercy of the same fate she had fought so hard to prevent him from having. "Mia Claire," he managed to say, his voice choked. "Your grandmother. Did she tell stories about the children's home where she worked?" The girl nodded, still crying. She talked about a boy she loved very much who became an important man. She said one day he would remember her. The hallway began to spin. Richard sat down heavily in a nearby chair, the locket trembling in his hands. All the walls he had built around his heart, all the justifications he had created for his solitary success, crumbled before a truth impossible to ignore. "Mr. Miles?" Carl's voice seemed to come from far away. "Are you all right?" No, he wasn't all right. How could he be? The universe had drawn a perfect, cruel circle, bringing him back to where he started. And now, before him, was the chance to repay a debt he didn't even know he carried. At the end of the hallway, a commotion announced someone's arrival. To the girl's father had arrived. The smell of alcohol preceded Anthony Silva before he even appeared in the hallway. He swayed slightly, not completely drunk, but far from sober. His thin, unshaven face bore the deep marks of suffering, and his bloodshot, feverish eyes scanned the area until they found Mia Claire. "Honey?" His voice came out hoarse, broken. Mia Claire, who seconds before had been fighting the nurse, now instinctively cowered behind Richard. The gesture did not go unnoticed by Anthony, whose face contorted into a mask of fury and shame. "Who are you?" He pointed a trembling finger at Richard. "What are you doing with my daughter?" Richard rose slowly, aware of the locket still in his hands. Carl, the social worker, tried to intervene, but Anthony ignored him, approaching with unsteady steps. "You rich bastard," he continued, his voice gradually rising. "Think you can buy everything? Think you can buy my daughters?" "Mr. Silva," Richard kept his voice calm, though his heart pounded. "Your youngest daughter is very sick, severe malnutrition. They need help." "I take care of my daughters." Anthony's shout echoed down the hall, making Mia Claire shrink even further. "I don't need charity from people like you." The word charity hit Richard like a slap. How many times had he himself used that tone of contempt when talking about social programs in his board meetings? How many times had he dismissed pleas for help with the same arrogance he now saw reflected in Anthony's wounded pride? "Daddy," Mia Claire's small voice trembled. "Please don't yell. Annie Beth is sick. Shut up." Anthony turned sharply to his daughter, and the sudden movement caused him to lose his balance, leaning heavily against the wall. You shouldn't have asked him for anything. We're poor, but we have dignity." "What dignity?" The words escaped Richard's lips before he could stop them. "The dignity of letting your daughters starve, of leaving them alone while you drown yourself in booze." The punch came quickly, but Richard was expecting it. He narrowly dodged it as two hospital security guards finally appeared, restraining Anthony, who struggled and shouted obscenities. Mia Claire began to cry. A silent, resigned cry that was even more painful than any scream. Her small shoulders shook, but she made no sound, as if she had learned the hard way to be invisible in moments of crisis. "Get him out of here," Carl ordered, his professional voice barely concealing his own disgust with the situation. "Mr. Silva, you are clearly impaired. You cannot see your daughters in this state." "They're my daughters," Anthony continued to shout as he was dragged away. "Mine! Nobody's going to take them from me." Nobody. When the shouting finally subsided, Richard knelt before Mia Claire. She was still crying silently, but her eyes were fixed on the locket in his hands. "Grandma used to say," she whispered between sobs, "that sometimes good people get lost in the dark, that we need to be patient, that one day they find their way back to the light." Richard felt his own tears threaten to fall. Miss Betty always said something similar at the children's home when a child arrived scarred by the traumas of abandonment or violence. "Your father is sick, Mia Claire," he explained gently. "It's not your fault. None of this is your fault." "He wasn't like this," she continued, as if needing to defend her father even after everything. Before, he used to smile, told stories, but then Mommy got sick and went to heaven, and he started taking medicine so he wouldn't cry. Then he needed more medicine and more. Carl cleared his throat, drawing Richard's attention. We need to discuss the next steps. Under these conditions, we cannot leave the girls in their father's care. No! Mia Claire grabbed Richard's suit sleeve. I don't want to go to a shelter. Grandma said they separate siblings at shelters. I can't leave Annie Beth alone. Richard looked at the locket in his hands, at the photo of Miss Betty smiling with that same gentle smile that had brightened his darkest days at the children's home. She had saved his life once, given him a chance when no one else believed, and now, by some cruel twist of fate, her granddaughters were about to face the same destiny she had fought so hard to prevent. I won't let that happen, he promised, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. I won't let them separate you. But as the words left his lips, Richard knew he was making a promise he might not be able to keep. The system was relentless, and not even all his money could change certain realities. Or could it? Night fell over the hospital like a heavy blanket of worry. Richard had refused to leave, settling into an uncomfortable chair beside the bed where Annie Beth slept, connected to tubes and monitors that beeped at regular intervals. Mia Claire had finally succumbed to exhaustion and slept curled up in another bed, her small hands still clutching the locket. His phone buzzed incessantly with missed calls and messages. The board meeting, scheduled for that afternoon, had been cancelled without explanation, something unprecedented in his career. His secretary must have been on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Mr. Miles? The soft voice of Dr. Laura Evans, the pediatrician in charge of the case, brought him back to the present. Can we talk for a moment? He followed her into the hallway, casting one last look at the sleeping girls. In the back of his mind, an irrational fear whispered that they might disappear if he lost sight of them. Annie Beth's condition is more serious than we initially thought, the doctor began, consulting her clipboard. Besides the malnutrition, she has severe anemia and signs of developmental delay. These are marks of prolonged deprivation. Richard felt his stomach churn, and Mia Claire. She's also malnourished, but in better condition. She probably gave her share of the food to her sister. The doctor paused, choosing her words. Mr. Miles, as a doctor, I'm obligated to report cases of child neglect. I know. He ran his hands over his tired face. The social worker is already involved. It's not just that. The hospital, well, we need to discuss the treatment costs. Without a legal guardian or insurance, I already said I'll pay for everything. Richard cut in, his voice sharper than he intended. It's not that simple. Without legal guardianship, even temporary, there are limits to what we can accept from third parties. Richard felt frustration build in his chest. It was surreal that his money, which opened so many doors, now hit bureaucratic hurdles when he needed it most. A movement at the end of the hall caught his attention. Carl, the social worker, was talking in a low voice to a middle-aged woman, carrying a folder similar to his. Excuse me, he murmured to the doctor, approaching the pair. Ah, Mr. Miles, Carl greeted him with a tired nod. This is Regina Hayes from Child Protective Services. We were discussing possible placements for the girls. Placements? The word sounded like a threat. Unfortunately, Regina began, her professional tone masking any emotion, we don't have many options. The father is clearly not in a condition to maintain custody at the moment. We need to find a shelter that... No. The word came out like a growl. They are not going to a shelter. Mr. Miles, Regina adjusted her glasses. I understand your concern, but you have no legal ties to these children. You can't. I was 7, he interrupted, his voice trembling slightly, when Miss Betty found me sleeping in a cardboard box behind the market. She worked at the children's home, but she took me to her house that night, gave me hot soup, and told me stories until I fell asleep. It was the first time in months I hadn't cried myself to sleep from fear. The silence that followed his confession was dense, palpable. She was these girls' grandmother, he continued, taking the locket from his pocket. Fate, God, or whatever it is, put these children in my path for a reason. I won't fail them as I failed her. Regina and Carl exchanged glances. Still, Regina began softer now. There are procedures, protocols. Then tell me what I need to do. Richard straightened his shoulders, his negotiator's posture returning instinctively. I want to apply for temporary custody of the girls. You have no experience with children, Carl argued. Your professional life, your history. I can learn. I can hire help. I can do whatever is necessary. And the father? Regina questioned. He will have the right to contest any decision. Nay, as if summoned by her words, a new commotion started at the hospital reception. Anthony's agitated voice echoed through the corridors, clearer now, mixed with sounds of arguing and objects falling. Richard closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of exhaustion on his shoulders. When he opened them again, there was a steely determination in his gaze. I'll take care of that too, he said, walking towards the shouts. But first, I need to have a serious talk with the girl's father. Man. As he walked away, Richard knew he was about to face a battle very different from those he was accustomed to. In business, money and power usually solved everything. But now, for the first time in decades, he would need to open his heart and confront his own demons to save two small lives that, unbeknownst to him, had already become the most important things in his world. Anthony Silver sat on the curb in front of the hospital, his head bowed between his hands. The security guards kept their distance, watching him with a mixture of pity and caution. When Richard approached, he realized the man was crying, a stifled cry from someone who no longer even has strength for their own pain. May I sit? Richard asked, ignoring the voice in his head complaining about the damage to his Italian suit. Anthony lifted his face, his red eyes struggling to focus. Come to laugh at my misery, mister? Came to talk. Richard sat beside him, maintaining a respectful distance. About your daughters. My daughters? Anthony let out a bitter laugh. What kind of father lets his daughters starve? What father doesn't notice his youngest is fading away? Miss Betty must be turning in her grave. The mention of her name made Richard flinch. You knew her well? She was my mother. Anthony ran a hand over his stubbled face. The best person I ever knew. Even after Teresa, my wife, died of cancer, Mom didn't let us fall apart. She took care of the girls while I worked construction, packed their lunches, told them stories, kept everything on track. His voice failed, and Richard felt a lump in his throat. He remembered Miss Betty's packed lunches at the children's home, always with a little note of affection. What happened? He asked softly. Life happened. Anthony pulled a bottle of pills from his pocket, turning it between his fingers without opening it. Fell off the scaffolding 2 years ago, 3 fractures in my spine. Doctors said I needed physical therapy, but I barely had money for the meds. The pain was unbearable. Started with weak painkillers. Then I needed something stronger. Richard looked at the bottle, recognizing the name of a potent opioid. When Mom died, Anthony continued, his voice choked. Something broke inside me. She was our rock, you know. I mixed the meds with booze, trying to numb the pain. Not just the physical. He paused, swallowing hard. The girls would try to wake me up, but I'd pretend not to hear. It was easier to pretend everything was fine, that it was just a rough patch. Your daughters are suffering, Anthony. You think I don't know? He burst out, but without the previous aggression. Now his voice carried only defeat. You think? It doesn't kill me to see Mia Claire at 5 years old, trying to be a mother to her sister, taking care of me when she should be playing with dolls. Richard took a deep breath, choosing his next words carefully. Your mother saved my life once. Anthony turned sharply towards him, confused. I was a street kid, Richard continued. She found me, took me to the children's home where she worked, gave me hope when I had nothing. She was the first person who believed I could be more than my circumstances. You... Anthony's eyes widened in recognition. You're Richard? The boy she always talked about? Richard nodded, feeling tears in his eyes. And I let her down. When I became successful, when I finally had the means to repay everything she did for me, I ignored her. I was too busy building my empire, too important to answer her calls. She was never angry, Anthony murmured, said you were just lost like I am now. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken meanings. In the sky, dark clouds announced rain. I can't change the past, Richard finally said. I can't bring your mother back or erase my mistakes with her, but I can honor her memory now by helping you and your daughters. I don't need charity, Anthony began, but his voice no longer carried the same hostility. It's not charity, it's a debt I owe Miss Betty and your daughters. Richard stood up, extending his hand. I'm going to help you get treatment, get your life back, but first I need you to admit you need help. For them. Anthony looked at the outstretched hand, then at the pill bottle in his lap. Raindrops began to fall, marking dark spots on the asphalt. They're all I have left, he whispered. Then fight for them. Richard kept his hand extended. Like your mother fought for me. The rain intensified, but neither man moved. On the 6th floor of the hospital, through an illuminated window, 2 small figures slept, unaware of the crucial moment unfolding on the sidewalk below. A moment that could forever change the course of their young lives. The hospital meeting room felt too small to hold all the emotions and expectations Hava Miterahitin the next morning. Richard, still in the same clothes from the day before, sat next to Anthony, who trembled slightly, the first signs of withdrawal beginning to manifest. Across the table, Carl and Regina exchanged worried glances as they reviewed the paperwork before them. So let me get this straight. Regina adjusted her glasses, her voice carrying a mix of skepticism and hope. Mr. Silva has agreed to voluntarily admit himself for substance abuse treatment, and Mr. Miles has offered to cover everything, Richard completed, his voice hoarse with fatigue. Anthony's treatment, the girl's medical expenses, a professional caregiver to look after them while he recovers. And where would the children stay during this period? Carl asked, though he already knew the answer. At my house. Richard felt Anthony tense beside him, temporarily, until their father is in a position to resume their care. This is, Regina began, but was interrupted by a sharp sound from the hallway. I don't want to. Let me go. Mia. Claire's voice cut through the walls, making everyone in the room rise instinctively. Anthony was the first to reach the door, but he stopped abruptly at the sight. A nurse was trying to hold Mia Claire, who struggled like a small wild animal, while another professional carried Annie Beth, still weak and sleepy, towards an elevator. What's happening? Richard demanded, his business command voice echoing down the hall. Court order, a third nurse explained, handing a document to Regina. The minors are to be transferred to the county shelter until the legal situation is resolved. No! Mia Claire managed to break free, running to hug her father's legs. Daddy, don't let them. I promise I'll take better care of Annie Beth. I promise I won't beg for food on the street anymore. Anthony fell to his knees, hugging his daughter tightly. His hands were visibly shaking now, and beads of sweat trickled down his pale face. Forgive me, honey, he whispered, his voice broken. Forgive me for failing you. Richard watched the scene with a tightness in his chest, memories of his own family separation years ago threatening to suffocate him. He couldn't let this happen. Not again. "Regina," he turned to the CPS worker, "there must be something we can do, some legal recourse, some—" "There is one possibility," she replied slowly, studying the document in her hands. "But it would require a much greater commitment than you might be prepared to make." "Anything. Temporary joint custody," she explained. Mr. Silva would retain his parental rights, but would share legal custody with Mr. Miles during the treatment. No period. This would give the girls a stable home without completely severing family ties. "But," Carl interjected, "that would require a full assessment of Mr. Miles. Home visits, psychological evaluation, background check." "Do it," Richard replied without hesitation. "Do it all today." Mia Claire had stopped crying, watching the adults' conversation. With wide, hopeful eyes, Annie Beth, in the nurse's arms, reached her weak little arms towards her father. "Anthony!" Richard knelt beside the man, ignoring the protests of his expensive suit. "I know we don't know each other, that you have no reason to trust me, but your mother trusted me once. She gave me a chance when no one else would. Let me repay that trust now." Anthony looked at his daughters, then at his trembling hands, and finally at Richard. "Promise you'll take good care of them, that you won't separate them. I promise on Miss Betty's memory." The silence that followed was broken only by the soft sound of Mia Claire's stifled sobs, who now alternated her embrace between her father and Richard, as if trying to create a physical bridge between the two worlds about to unite in her life. "Okay then," Anthony finally said, his voice firmer despite the tears. "But I want to be able to see them. I want them to know I'm fighting to come back." Regina was already on the phone, initiating the necessary procedures. Carl scribbled furiously on his clipboard. The nurses waited, still unsure how to proceed. And in the midst of all that bureaucratic and emotional chaos, Richard felt something he hadn't experienced since his childhood in the children's home. The feeling that family wasn't just about blood, but about choices. Difficult, sometimes painful choices, but choices that could change destinies. He only hoped he was making the right one. Richard Miles' mansion had never seemed so empty as when he opened the door to show the girls their new temporary home. The polished marble of the entrance hall reflected the apprehensive expressions of Mia Claire and Annie Beth, who clung to each other like little castaways in an unknown sea. It had been an intense week. While Annie Beth finished her hospital treatment, Richard had turned his life upside down. He converted the second-floor office into a room for the girls, hired a child psychologist recommended by the hospital, underwent countless interviews with social workers, and, for the first time in 2 decades, took an extended leave from work. "This place is bigger than the hospital," Mia Claire whispered, her voice echoing in the vast space. "Too big for one person," Richard replied, trying to smile. "That's why I needed company." Annie Beth, still pale but already stronger, squeezed her sister's hand. Since being discharged, she hadn't uttered a single word. The psychologist had explained it was a common reaction to trauma. Silence as a shield. "Want to see your room?" Mia Claire nodded, but before they could go upstairs, she stopped. "Has Daddy arrived at the clinic yet?" Richard felt his heart clench. Anthony had left for rehab that morning, a painful farewell that still hung in the air. "Yes, he has. He can call tonight, remember?" "Like we agreed." The girls' room was the only part of the house that didn't look like it was out of a design magazine. Richard had strived to make it cozy, walls painted in soft tones, 2 beds side by side after Mia Claire flatly refused to sleep separately from her sister, and a large armchair by the window for bedtime stories. "There's something I wanted to show you," he said, opening a dresser drawer. From inside, he took out an old picture frame. Mia Claire let out a muffled exclamation. In the photo, A much younger Miss Betty smiled, surrounded by children from the home. Among them, a skinny boy with wary eyes. "Is that you, Mr. Richard?" "That's me. Your grandmother kept this photo for years. I found it among the things she left at the old house." Annie Beth, for the first time, showed interest. She approached timidly, touching the glass of the picture frame with delicate fingers. "Grammy," she murmured, so softly it was barely audible. Mia Claire instantly hugged her sister, silent tears streaming down her face. It was the first word Annie Beth had spoken in days. The moment was interrupted by a soft knock on the door. Marcia, the housekeeper Richard had hired especially to help with the girls, announced that lunch was ready. "We made macaroni and cheese," she said gently. "Your social worker mentioned it's your favorite." At the kitchen table, Richard had insisted they wouldn't use the formal dining room. Another challenge presented itself. Annie Beth didn't want to eat, turning her face away with each attempt by Marcia. "Let me feed her," Mia Claire intervened, already picking up the fork. "She only eats food I give her." "Mia Claire," Richard called softly, "you don't have to do that anymore. You don't have to be your sister's mother." The girl paused, fork suspended in midair. "But who will take care of her?" "All of us. Me, you, Marcia. But mostly, you can just be a sister. You can be a child." The words seemed to confuse Mia. "Claire," her small forehead furrowed in concentration. "I don't know how—" "We can learn together," Richard offered. "How about we start now?" Marcia made ice cream for dessert. "When was the last time you had ice cream without worrying about saving some for your sister?" The girl's eyes filled with tears again, but this time there was a shy smile on her lips. It was as if, for the first time, she glimpsed the possibility of just being a 5-year-old child. The rest of the day passed between discoveries and adjustments. Richard learned that Annie Beth only slept with a nightlight on, that Mia Claire had nightmares if she didn't check 3 times that the door was actually open, that both were startled by loud noises, and that neither knew how to properly play with the new toys he had bought. At night, when he finally managed to get them into bed, Richard sat in the armchair in their room, exhausted but determined. On the nightstand, the picture frame with Miss Betty's photo seemed to smile approvingly. His phone vibrated, a message from the rehab clinic. Anthony had arrived safely but was facing the first severe symptoms of withdrawal. The doctor suggested postponing the call to the girls until the next day. How would he explain this to them? How would he keep his promise to never lie without adding more pain to their young lives? Annie Beth's soft snores and Mia Claire's rhythmic breathing filled the room with a fragile peace. Richard knew the road ahead would be difficult. He knew there was much more to learn, much more to heal. But looking at those 2 small, sleeping figures, he finally understood why Miss Betty never gave up on him, even in his worst moments at the children's home. Some battles were worth any sacrifice. The scream pierced the night like an arrow, yanking Richard from his sleep. His feet hit the floor before his brain fully registered what was happening. In the hallway, Marcia was also running towards the girls' room. Mia Claire thrashed in her bed, trapped in a nightmare that made her cry out disconnected words. Annie Beth, awake and trembling, watched the scene with wide, terrified eyes. "Daddy, don't let him take Annie Beth. Stop! Stop!" Richard approached carefully, mindful of the psychologist's instructions on how to handle such episodes. "Mia Claire, you're safe. Annie Beth is here. Nobody is going to take her." But the girl remained trapped in the nightmare, tears streaming down her contorted face. It was Annie Beth who, surprising everyone, reached out her small hand and touched her sister's arm. "Claire," she whispered, using the nickname only she used. "Wake up." The effect was instantaneous. Mia Claire opened her eyes, disoriented for a moment, before hugging her sister tightly. The two cried together, sharing a fear the adults could only imagine. "Want to talk about the nightmare?" Richard asked softly, sitting on the edge of the bed. Mia Claire shook her head, but after a few seconds she murmured, "It was about that day." Richard and Marcia exchanged worried glances. Which that day? There were so many traumas to choose from. "The day the bad man tried to take Annie Beth," she continued, her voice trembling. "When Daddy was sleeping and wouldn't wake up, he said he'd take care of her, that he'd give her food, but I knew he was lying." Richard's stomach churned. None of the social reports had mentioned this attempted abduction. How many dangers had these children faced alone? "No one is going to separate you," he promised, his voice hoarse with emotion. "You'll never have to protect yourselves alone again." "Did Daddy call?" Annie Beth asked suddenly, surprising everyone again with her rare words. Richard's heart tightened. How could he explain that their father was going through too difficult a time to talk to them? How could he keep his promise of honesty without increasing their fears? "Your dad," he began, choosing his words carefully, "is very tired today. The treatment to get better is hard at the beginning, but he sent word that he loves you and that he'll call tomorrow." Mia Claire nodded with an understanding beyond her years, like when he took too much medicine and kept sleeping. "Something like that," Richard replied, fighting the lump in his throat. "But this time it's different. This time he's fighting to really wake up." Marcia approached with 2 glasses of warm milk with honey, a concoction Miss Betty used to make to calm the children at the home. The familiar aroma seemed to bring some comfort to the girls. "Mr. Richard," Mia Claire called after a few sips, "tell us a story about Grandma, from when you were little like us." Richard settled into the armchair, pulling a blanket over the 2 girls who now looked at him expectantly. How could he explain that the stories of his childhood were as painful as theirs? "Did you know your grandma taught me to read?" he began, opting for a sweeter memory. "I was 8 and had never been to school. She would spend hours with me after work, using old magazines to teach me the letters." "Just like she did with us!" Annie Beth exclaimed, her voice stronger now. "Exactly. And do you know what she always said?" Richard continued, feeling tears in his own eyes. "That books were doors to other worlds, that through them we could escape sadness, even if just for a little while." The girls listened intently, their eyes heavy with sleep, but resisting to hear more. Richard told them about how Miss Betty turned lessons into games, how she celebrated every small achievement with hugs and homemade cookies. When they finally fell asleep, clinging to each other as always, Richard remained in the armchair, watching their gentle breaths. His phone vibrated in his pocket, a message from the clinic. Anthony had had a difficult night, with delirium and severe tremors. The doctors were worried. The moon shone through the window, casting soft shadows across the room. On the nightstand, Miss Betty's photo seemed to watch him with that same look of determination he knew so well. "Help me," he whispered to the photo. "Help me be strong for them. Help me not give up on him." The silence of the night was his only answer. But somehow Richard felt he wasn't alone in this battle. Somewhere Miss Betty continued to guide his steps, as she had done so many years ago. The meeting with Child Protective Services wasn't going as Richard had hoped. After 2 weeks of adjustment, which he believed had been positive, the news was not encouraging. Regina nervously adjusted her glasses as she read the report in her hands. "Mr. Miles, there are some concerns we need to discuss." She paused, choosing her words. The psychologist noted that Annie Beth still shows severe signs of trauma. The selective mutism persists. She only speaks to her sister and occasionally to you. Richard felt his hands sweat. "She's progressing. Just yesterday she talked during dinner." "Yes, but that's not the only issue," Regina continued. "Mia Claire has developed an extremely protective behavior that borders on detrimental. She refuses to participate in activities separate from her sister, doesn't sleep without checking multiple times if Annie Beth is okay, and shows signs of severe anxiety when she's not in control of the situation. The words hit Richard like physical blows. He had noticed these behaviors, of course, but believed that with time and patience, and there's the issue of the father, Carl, who had been silent until then, interjected. The report from the rehab clinic isn't optimistic. Mr. Silver has had 3 relapse episodes since admission. He's fighting, Richard defended, his voice firmer than he felt. Don't you see how happy the girls are when he calls? How their eyes light up when they talk about his visits? That's precisely why we're concerned, Regina sighed. The bond is strong, but potentially harmful if the father can't recover. The expectations created, the promises. The door to the room opened abruptly, interrupting the conversation. Marcia entered, her usually calm face marked with worry. Mr. Richard, sorry to interrupt, but you need to come now. It's Annie Beth. Richard's heart stopped for a second. He jumped up, barely registering Regina's protests that the meeting wasn't over. In the school nurse's office at the private school where the girls had started just 3 days earlier, Annie Beth sat on an examination table, trembling uncontrollably. Mia Claire, beside her, held her hand tightly. What happened? The school nurse approached. She had a panic attack during recess. The teacher tried to separate them for different group activities, and I told you I couldn't leave her alone, Mia Claire protested, tears of anger in her eyes. Nobody ever believes me. Richard knelt in front of the girls, ignoring the stain that would form on his expensive pants. Tell me what happened, Annie. The little girl just shook her head, burying her face in her sister's shoulder. It was the boy, Mia Claire explained, her voice trembling with indignation. He said he knew our dad, that he saw him passed out on the street near our old house, said a drunk's dad doesn't deserve to have kids. Richard's blood ran cold. How could a child be so cruel? How could he protect them from a world that seemed determined to hurt them even more? I want to go home, Annie Beth whispered, her voice almost inaudible. Let's go home, Richard agreed, already preparing to carry her. That's when he noticed the crumpled drawing in her small hands. It was a family portrait, like so many others the girls had made in recent weeks. But this one was different. In it, 5 figures held hands, the 2 girls in the center, their father on one side, Richard on the other, and above, with crudely drawn wings, Miss Betty smiling. It's our family, Annie Beth explained, surprising everyone with a complete sentence. The teacher asked us to draw who we love. I drew everyone. Richard felt something break inside him. There it was, the truth he so feared to face. He wasn't. Just a temporary guardian, a fleeting support. Somehow in just 2 weeks, he had become a fundamental part of these girls' lives. Can I keep the drawing? He asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. Annie Beth nodded, carefully handing him the paper. That's when his phone vibrated in his pocket, an urgent message from the rehab clinic. Anthony had disappeared during the night. Richard looked at the girls, at the drawing in his hands, at the nurse and Marcia who awaited instructions. How could he protect these children from yet another disappointment? How could he keep his promise to never lie without destroying the fragile happiness they were beginning to build? The answer came in Annie Beth's shy smile, in Mia Claire's firm handshake. Family wasn't just about blood ties or legal papers. It was about being present, about weathering storms together, about rebuilding from the wreckage. Let's go home, he repeated, firmer now. We have a lot to talk about. Rain lashed against the mansion windows as Richard paced restlessly in the living room, his phone glued to his ear. It was the 15th call in 2 hours, another frustrated attempt to locate Anthony. On the sofa, Mia Claire pretended to read a book, but her eyes never left Richard's face, attentive to every change in expression. Anything yet? She asked when he hung up, her small voice carrying a weight far too great for her years. Not yet, sweetie. Richard sat beside her, trying to keep his voice calm. "But we have people looking everywhere." Annie Beth slept on the other sofa, exhausted after the episode at school. Her family drawing was now framed on Richard's nightstand, a constant reminder of what was at stake. "Is he coming back?" "Mia?" Claire asked, closing the book she was pretending to read. "The last time he disappeared like this, Grandma said he'd gone on a trip." But she was crying when she said it. Richard felt his heart clench. How could a 5-year-old be so perceptive? How could he explain that sometimes adults break promises not out of malice, but because they themselves are broken? "Mia Claire," he began, choosing each word carefully. "Remember what we talked about your dad being sick? An illness that makes him do things he doesn't want to do?" She nodded, biting her lower lip, like when he drank too much medicine and forgot to buy food. "That's right. And just like Annie Beth needed doctors when she got very sick, your dad is also needing help to get better." "But he ran away from the hospital," she stated, her small hands clenching into fists. "Just like he runs away from everything." The bitterness in her voice was painful to hear. Richard was about to respond when Annie Beth began to stir in her sleep, muttering disconnected words. Mia Claire immediately rushed to her sister's side, her own fears forgotten in the need to comfort. "It's okay, Annie Beth," she whispered, stroking her sister's hair. "We're safe here." The phone vibrated again. It was Carl, the social worker. "We found him." The voice on the other end sounded exhausted. "He's in the ER at County General. He overdosed, but he's stable." Richard closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the news. Is he going to make it?" "Yes, but the situation is complicated. It was an involuntary admission this time. The judge has already been notified." The implications were clear. Anthony had lost his chance at voluntary rehab. Now the system would take control. "The girls," Richard began, but Carl interrupted him. "Regina is on her way to your house. We need to talk about permanent custody." The word permanent echoed in his mind as he hung up. Beside him, Mia Claire watched him with those eyes that seemed to see into his soul. "Daddy messed up again, didn't he?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Richard nodded, unable to lie. "Yes, but he's alive. He's at the hospital and people will take care of him." "Are we going to have to leave here?" The question caught him by surprise. Mia Claire continued, the words tumbling out. "When Daddy messed up, we always had to leave. First the big house, then the apartment, then—" "No," Richard interrupted her firmly. "You're not going anywhere. This is your home now, for as long as you want to stay. Promise?" "Promise." Annie Beth chose that moment to wake up, her sleepy eyes focusing on her sister's tense face. "Claire, why are you crying?" Mia Claire quickly wiped away tears she hadn't even realized were falling. "It's nothing, Annie Beth. I was just thinking about Grandma. She's taking care of Daddy in heaven," Annie Beth said with surprising conviction. "Mr. Richard takes care of us here." The simplicity of that statement hit Richard like a punch to the gut. Sometime, without him even noticing, those two girls had become the center of his universe. It was no longer about a debt to Miss Betty, or about doing the right thing. It was about love, pure and simple. The doorbell rang. Regina had arrived. It was time for decisions that would forever change the fate of this makeshift family. Richard took a deep breath, gathering strength for the battle ahead. "Girls," he called softly, "how about you help Marcia make that special hot chocolate while I talk with Ms. Regina?" They both nodded, but before leaving, Mia Claire turned. "Mr. Richard, don't let them separate us, okay?" "Never," he promised, and this time there was no doubt in his voice. Some promises were easy to keep when they came from the heart. Richard's office, once a sanctuary for business decisions, now seemed too small to contain the weight of the conversation unfolding. Regina leafed through a thick folder of documents while he waited, his hands clasped on the desk to hide their tremor. "The situation is delicate," Regina began, her tired eyes revealing sleepless nights. "Mr. Silver's overdose complicates everything. The judge is inclined to terminate parental rights. And the girls? That's what we need to discuss." She adjusted her glasses, a gesture Richard had learned to associate with difficult news. "The psychologist's report indicates that separating them now would be catastrophic for both their emotional development. But finding an adoptive family willing to take in 2 children, one with severe trauma—" "I want permanent custody," Richard interrupted, his voice firmer than he felt. Regina studied him for a long moment. "Mr. Miles, I need to be clear. Your financial situation and physical setup are excellent, but there are concerns. You're single, a self-confessed workaholic with no prior experience with children. The judge will question your motives." "My motives?" Richard felt a pang of irritation. "I've spent the last 3 weeks practically living at the hospital with Anthony, taking care of the girls, reorganizing my entire life. And why?" Regina interrupted him. "Why this intense emotional investment in children who, until a month ago, were complete strangers?" The question caught him off guard. Why, really? The answer came in the form of a memory. Him at 7, shivering with cold on a sidewalk when Miss Betty found him. "Because I know exactly how they feel," he replied, his voice choked. "I know what it's like to have your world fall apart and find salvation in the love of someone who had no obligation to care." From upstairs came the sound of laughter. Mia Claire and Annie Beth playing with Marcia. The sound was like music after so many tears. "I'm not doing this out of guilt or obligation," he continued. "Those girls, they've taught me more about love in the last few weeks than I've learned in 50 years of life." Regina smiled for the first time that night. "You know it won't be easy, don't you? Annie Beth will still need years of therapy. Mia Claire has serious abandonment and control issues. Their father, even in treatment, will continue to be a presence in their lives." "I know, and I'm prepared." "Are you really?" she questioned. "Your life will change completely. No more extended business trips, late-night meetings, decisions made thinking only of yourself." Richard opened his desk drawer, pulling out a thick envelope. "It already has. I submitted my resignation as CEO today. I'll stay on the board, but only as a consultant. My time has different priorities now." Regina took the envelope, her eyebrows raised in surprise. It was a radical decision for a man who had dedicated his life to business. "There's one more thing you need to know," she said after a moment. "Mr. Silver, when he was in the ER, he asked to speak with me. He said if he managed to recover this time, he wanted you to have custody of the girls. He said they deserve more than a broken father can offer." The words hit Richard like a punch. Anthony, in his most vulnerable moment, had entrusted his daughters to him. The weight of that trust was both frightening and sacred. A noise at the door interrupted the conversation. Annie Beth stood there, clutching her favorite blanket. "Mr. Richard?" Her voice was small but clear. "Tell a bedtime story," Regina observed. The interaction with professional interest. It was the first time she'd seen Annie Beth initiate a conversation with an adult other than her sister. "Of course, Princess, I'll be right there." He turned back to Regina. "We need to finish this conversation." "Actually," she smiled, putting her documents away, "I think I've seen everything I needed to see. I'm going to recommend to the judge that permanent custody be granted in your favor, with supervised visitation rights for the father when he's able." Richard felt his eyes sting. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. Being a parent is the hardest job in the world." Being a parent to traumatized children is even more challenging. "Mr. Richard," Mia Claire's voice echoed from the hallway. "Annie Beth won't sleep without a story." "Coming," he replied, getting up. Before leaving, however, he looked one last time at Regina. "You know what Miss Betty always used to say? That life's greatest blessings come disguised as impossible challenges." Regina nodded, watching him leave. Through the open door, she could hear the girls' voices mingling with his, creating a familiar melody that just a few weeks ago would have been unthinkable in that empty house. Sometimes, she thought, the strongest families are those forged not by blood, but by love and the conscious choice to stay together despite all obstacles. The visiting room at the rehab clinic had soft-toned walls and comfortable furniture, an obvious attempt to create a welcoming environment. Mia Claire held Annie Beth's hand tightly as they waited, their little legs swinging nervously in the oversized chairs. 2 months had passed since Anthony's overdose. 2 months of changes, adjustments, and small daily victories. Annie Beth now spoke more, though she still had silent days. Mia Claire was slowly beginning to allow others besides herself to care for her sister. "Will he be different?" Annie Beth asked softly, adjusting the bow on her new dress for the 10th time. Richard, sitting between them, felt his heart tighten. It was the first visit since the incident, carefully planned after weeks of family therapy. "He's trying hard to get better," he answered honestly. "But I need you to remember what we talked about. If at any point you feel uncomfortable, just squeeze my hand, okay?" The girls nodded solemnly. For the past week, they had rehearsed this moment several times with their psychologist, Dr. Melissa, preparing for all possible scenarios. The door opened, and Anthony entered, accompanied by his therapist. He was thinner, but his eyes were clear for the first time in years. Seeing his daughters, he stopped, as if unsure how to proceed. "Daddy!" Annie Beth was the first to break the silence, surprising everyone. She ran to him, and he knelt to receive her, silent tears streaming down his face. Mia Claire remained beside Richard, her small hand gripping his tightly. Her eyes studied her father with a mixture of hope and distrust that broke his heart. "Are you really better?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Anthony looked up, still hugging Annie Beth. "I'm trying, honey. Every day. It's not easy, but..." "Nothing worthwhile is easy," Mia Claire completed, quoting one of Miss Betty's favorite sayings. "Grandma always said that." A sob escaped Anthony. "Your grandmother. She'd be so disappointed in me." "No," Richard intervened gently. "She would understand. She always understood." Mia Claire finally let go of Richard's hand and approached her father, her steps hesitant but determined. "We want to understand too, Dad. But you have to promise you won't run away anymore." "I won't," Anthony replied, extending his free arm. To her. "This time is different. I'm learning to really fight." The girls snuggled into their father's embrace, and for a moment, Richard felt like an intruder. He was about to get up to give the family privacy when Annie Beth reached out her hand towards him. "Come on, Mr. Richard," she called. "Your family now too." The simplicity of that statement struck everyone present. Anthony looked up, meeting Richard's gaze. "Thank you," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion, "for not giving up on them, for not giving up on me. We just need to promise one thing," Mia Claire declared with her characteristic seriousness. "Everyone has to promise to always tell the truth, even when it's hard, even when it hurts." "I promise," Anthony was the first to respond. "I promise," Richard echoed. "Me too," Annie Beth added. Mia Claire observed each of them for a moment before nodding, satisfied. "Okay then, now we're a real family." Anthony's therapist, who had been observing the scene discreetly, made a note on her clipboard. It was rare to see such a young child establish such clear boundaries. Rarer still to see adults respecting those boundaries with such seriousness. Richard watched the girls show their father the drawings they had brought, telling him about their new school, about the dog they wanted to adopt, a discussion still ongoing. Anthony listened with rapt attention, his eyes shining with unshed tears each time he discovered something new about his daughters. At one point, Annie Beth took Miss Betty's locket from her dress pocket. "Look, Dad, Mr. Richard had the chain fixed." Anthony took the locket with trembling hands, opening it to see his mother's photo. "She always said family is more than blood," he murmured. "I think I'm only now understanding what she meant." Richard felt his own tears threaten to fall. There, in that room with soft walls, something few would understand was forming, a family built not despite the scars, but through them, a family that chose every day to face their fears together. The courtroom was quiet that Thursday morning, the air heavy with expectation. Richard adjusted his tie for the 10th time, a nervous habit that not even his years of corporate meetings had managed to eliminate. Beside him, Mia Claire and Annie Beth looked impeccable in their matching dresses, chosen especially for that day. It was the day of the final custody hearing. "How much longer?" Mia Claire asked, her fingers playing with Miss Betty's locket, which she now always wore. "They'll call us soon, sweetie," Richard replied, trying to keep his voice calm despite the turmoil in his chest. Annie Beth, who had made surprising progress in therapy over the past few weeks, observed everything with her attentive eyes. "Is Daddy coming?" "Yes, he's already on his way with the social worker from the clinic." As if summoned by his words, Anthony appeared at the end of the hallway. 3 months of intensive treatment had wrought a visible transformation. He was stronger, his eyes clear and determined. The girls ran to hug him, and he received them with a serene smile Richard had never seen before. "Ready?" he asked softly, kneeling to be at his daughter's eye level. "Yes," Mia Claire replied with her characteristic seriousness. "We practiced everything with Dr. Melissa." The girls' psychologist had worked tirelessly to prepare them for this moment. She explained what the hearing would be like, what the judge might ask, how to express their feelings honestly but calmly. Regina and Carl arrived soon after, carrying thick folders of documents. The last 3 months were recorded there. Progress reports, psychological evaluations, school records, all documenting the girls' extraordinary evolution under Richard's shared care and Anthony's steady recovery. "The judge is ready to see us," Regina announced, her professional tone barely disguising her own anxiety. Inside the courtroom, Judge Martinez awaited them with a neutral expression. He was known for his dedication to complex family cases, for always putting the children's well-being first. "Before we begin formally," he said after everyone was seated, "I'd like to hear from the girls. Mia Claire and Annie Beth, can you approach?" The sisters exchanged nervous glances before standing up. Richard felt his heart race. This was the crucial moment. "Do you know why we're here today?" the judge asked gently. "Yes, sir," Mia Claire replied, her voice small but firm. "It's to decide about our family." "And what do you think about that?" It was Annie Beth who surprised everyone, taking a step forward. "We want to stay with both of them." The judge leaned forward slightly, interested. "With both of them." "With Daddy and Mr. Richard," she explained, gaining confidence. "Daddy is fighting to get better, we know. And Mr. Richard," she hesitated, searching for the right words. "Mr. Richard saved us," Mia Claire completed, "not just from being hungry or alone. He saved our whole family." Anthony lowered his head, silent tears streaming down his face. Richard felt his own vision blur. "And you're not afraid," the judge continued, "that things might go back to how they were before?" Mia Claire took the locket from her neck, opening it to show the photo. "Our grandma always said that real family isn't just when everything's good, It's especially when things are hard and we choose to stay together anyway. The judge studied the photo for a moment, a small smile appearing on his lips. Your grandmother sounds like she was a very wise woman. She was, Richard and Anthony replied in unison, then exchanged a look of mutual understanding. The judge leaned back in his chair, observing the scene before him. Two girls holding hands, a father in recovery, a businessman who had given up. Everything for a chance to make a difference, a team of dedicated professionals who had made this moment possible. You know, he began, his tone softer now, in 20 years on the bench, I've learned that sometimes the best families are the ones we build with our hearts, not just with blood. Mia Claire squeezed Annie Beth's hand, who smiled, a genuine smile, the kind that just a few months ago seemed impossible. Your Honor, Regina interjected respectfully, we have all the reports and evaluations. The judge raised his hand, gently interrupting her. I will review all the documentation, of course, but sometimes, when it comes to family, the heart sees what the papers cannot show. Richard felt a wave of hope swell in his chest. Beside him, Anthony breathed deeply, as if trying to control his own emotions. We still have much to discuss, the judge continued, but I want you all to know one thing. What you've built here, this improbable and courageous family, is exactly the kind of miracle that makes me believe in justice that transcends the law. The words hung in the air like a promise, filling the room with something that had long been lost in that family. Hope. The scent of roses filled the small garden Richard had built in the back of the mansion. It was a special Sunday. Exactly 6 months since that first encounter on the restaurant sidewalk. The girls ran across the lawn, their laughter echoing in the afternoon air, while the adults finished setting the table. And for an early dinner. Careful not to get your dresses dirty, Anthony called out, watching his daughters play with popcorn, the mutt they had finally adopted after weeks of negotiation. Let them be, Anthony, Marcia smiled, placing another cake. On the laden table, clothes can be washed, childhood can't be recovered. Richard watched the scene with a full heart. After the decisive hearing, the judge had granted joint custody to him and Anthony with an innovative agreement that allowed the girls to maintain 2 homes, the mansion and the small apartment Richard had helped Anthony rent nearby for when he was definitively discharged from the clinic. Mr. Richard, Annie Beth ran to him, her cheeks flushed with excitement. Look what I found in the garden. In her small hands, a freshly bloomed white rose. Richard knelt to admire the flower, remembering how just 6 months ago, this same girl could barely speak to strangers. Beautiful, he smiled, just like the ones your grandma used to plant in the children's home garden. Remember I told you? That's why I asked to plant white roses here, she replied with a mischievous grin. Grandma would like it. Mia Claire approached, holding the locket open. Look, it's the first time Annie Beth has smiled just like Grandma in the photo. Anthony, who had approached silently, took the locket carefully. 6 months sober had returned the steadiness to his hands. Mom always said her smile was a gift from God, that we needed to share it with anyone who needed hope. Like she did. With me, Richard completed softly. And like you all did with us, Mia Claire declared, hugging both her father and Richard. The moment was interrupted by Regina and Carl, arriving with more guests for the small celebration. The girls' psychologist, their new school teacher, even Judge Martinez had accepted the invitation. Everyone who had been part of that extraordinary journey. Cake time, Marcia announced, and the children ran to the table. Before Richard could follow, Anthony held him back by the arm. We need to talk. For a moment, Richard felt a tightness in his chest. Years of experience with broken families had taught him to fear those words. But Anthony's serene smile dispelled his fears. I got a job, Anthony announced, at the rehab center's woodshop. I'll be able to teach the craft to others in recovery. Anthony, that's wonderful. And there's more, he continued, his voice choking slightly. Yesterday, when the girls were with me at the apartment, Mia Claire asked me something. She wanted to know if it was okay for her to call both of us Dad. Richard felt his legs weaken. And what did you say? I said some people are lucky enough to have two dads who love them. That family isn't about dividing love, it's about multiplying it. The tears Richard had been holding back finally escaped. Your mother would be proud of you, Anthony. Of both of us, he corrected. She always knew you'd come back. She just didn't imagine it would be through her granddaughters. A joyful shout interrupted the conversation. Annie Beth had managed to blow out all the cake candles at once. Did you make a wish? Someone asked. I didn't need to, she replied with the profound simplicity of children. I already have everything. I wanted. Mia Claire, with her ever-protective manner but now lighter, more childlike, hugged her sister. We have 2 houses, 2 dads, a dog. And most importantly, Annie Beth completed, we don't have to be afraid anymore. Richard and Anthony joined the table, one on each side of the girls. Judge Martinez, observing the scene, leaned over to Regina. You know, in all my years on the bench, I've never seen such a different family work out so well. Regina smiled, watching Richard help Annie Beth cut the cake, while Anthony wiped a smudge of chocolate from Mia Claire's face. Maybe because they understood what Miss Betty always knew. That family is less about who you're born to and more about who you choose to love. In the center of the table, next to the cake, was a new picture frame. In it, a recent photo, Richard and Anthony sitting on the garden swing, a girl in each lap, popcorn at their feet, and above them, hanging from a delicate ribbon, the open locket showing Miss Betty's eternal smile. It was an improbable family, built on scars and redemption, proving that sometimes the greatest miracles begin with a simple plea for food on a random sidewalk.